All right, ladies and gentlemen, you are locked on Falcons. I'm your host, Aaron Freeman. And of course, today is Mock Draft Monday, where we will be examining a 4-round mock draft that has the Falcons trading up for the top quarterback in the draft. And no, I'm not talking about Malik Willis. Of course, I'm talking about Pittsburgh's Kenny Pickett. We'll be talking about that as well as the other picks that the Falcons make in this 4-round mock on today's Locked On Falcons.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, you know me. I'm Aaron Freeman, been covering the Falcons for many years, formerly at falcfans.com, RIP, still going strong on Twitter at falcfans, and of course, the host of this illustrious Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. And today's episode of Locked On Falcons is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. So today's Mock Draft Monday, I believe this is Mock Draft Monday 7.0, and we are talking about Chad Reuter at NFL.com's 4-round mock draft that included some trades. He had the Falcons trading up from 8 to number 3 overall with the Houston Texans to acquire Pittsburgh quarterback Kenny Pickett. We'll be talking about what the Falcons gave up in that trade. We'll also be talking about the players on today's episode that Chad Reuter had the Falcons selecting in rounds 2 and 3. In round 2, he had the Falcons taking UConn defensive tackle Travis Jones with the 58th overall pick. In round 3, with the 74th overall pick, Oklahoma edge rusher Nik Bonitto was the Falcon selection in their second third-round pick. The all-important Matt Ryan acquisition turned into tight end. From Iowa State, Charlie Kolar. Of course, Arthur Smith would love to turn Matt Ryan into another tight end. And you're probably sitting there baying, hey, Aaron, don't the Falcons have more picks than that on day 2 in the draft? And yes, they do. But in Chad's mock, he had the Falcons not only giving up their second round pick, their first of 2 second-round picks, pick number 43. He also had the Falcons giving up their 4th round pick in this 4-round mock to the Houston Texans, in addition to next year, the 2023 first-round pick, to move up 5 spots in this draft to select a quarterback in Kenny Pickett. And I will just jump off and say that is a massive overpay based off of Chad's mock trade, or whatever the case may be. Theoretically, if you look at the various trade value charts, depending on which one you look at, the Falcons could only be expected to give up a second to potentially to go up from 8 to 3. And even if they were to give up more and sweeten the pot, maybe you give up next year's second or something like that in order to make it worthwhile, or whatever the case may be. So if you're giving up a number 1 pick in next year's draft to go up 5 spots at this point, you better be getting something back from Houston in that regard. So, maybe that's the trade, the quarterback trade that, Houston and Atlanta would be making in an alternate reality, in addition to the other one that they could have been making in an alternate reality. But we'll talk about those day 2 selections a little bit later. Let's talk a little bit more before we get into specifically about Kenny Pickett. Let's talk a little bit more about the idea of the Falcons going up for a quarterback. Frankly, I don't see that happening. In this mock draft, Chad Reuter had Malik Willis going number 2 overall to the Detroit Lions. And there has been a lot of growing buzz over the last several weeks and months that Willis will go that high. I don't see it. I know a lot of the connections that people are making is that the Detroit Lions did coach Malik Willis at the Senior Bowl. Sam Howell were also, and Bailey Zappi were also on that Senior Bowl team. For me, the Willis hype is out of control. I think there's a chance that he certainly goes in the top 10, but probably the earliest a quarterback is going to get picked in this draft is Carolina at 6. Maybe Atlanta takes a quarterback at 8. They're certainly not going to trade up for one. And so, to me, I think we're only going to see one quarterback taken in the top 10 this year. And the internet and Twitter, draft Twitter, whatever you want to call it, is absolutely in love with Malik Willis as that guy. I feel like Kenny Pickett is the more likelier of the two sitting here today. Again, we might be singing a different tune by the time we get to draft time. But Dane Brugler, Lance Zierlein, two people that I tend to listen to when it comes to how NFL teams feel about stuff. Said on their podcast on the Athletic football show this past week that the internet is way much higher on Malik Willis than the NFL teams are. So I still think there's probably a better chance that Malik Willis goes somewhere outside the top 10 than certainly at 2 at this point in time. And so I think right now, the first quarterback taken off the board probably will be Carolina's pick at 6. And I think Pickett is probably going to be, if I was putting money, I would probably put a little bit more money on Pickett being the guy, but it's close to a toss up between him and Willis at that 6th spot. But as I said, I can't see more than one quarterback going in the top 10. It's just not that good enough a class. We can go deeper into that as the next 4 weeks unfold, but we'll just leave that at that. Is it possible that the Falcons could take a quarterback at 8 and just chill there and take, Willis or Pickett, whoever's there, particularly in a world where Carolina passes on the quarterback and takes it offensive tackle, like a lot of people think is also, an option for them? Yes, I think it's possible. But part of the reason why I think it's possible or plausible or whatever you want to call it is of my general negativity towards this regime. Considering that I think taking a quarterback at 8 would be a very questionable decision. But if you're of the opinion that this regime has done a very questionable job up to this point, and anybody who's listened to the podcast over the last week knows where I stand on that, then, taking a quarterback at 8 makes perfect sense. If you're just basically if you're just going to throw, good reasoning and sound logic out the window, and you're just going to we're just enamored by the tools or whatever. But we're not going to talk about Malik Willis on today's episode. We will get into Kenny Pickett. I don't think the Falcons would take Kenny Pickett at 8. I do think if they were to take a quarterback at 8, it would probably be Malik Willis. I also think there's a chance that the Falcons could chill at 43 and get Kenny Pickett. I think there's certainly a greater probability that Kenny Pickett falls to the 2nd round than Malik Willis does. I think really the concern for Kenny Pickett is not that he doesn't have the skill set to be, the top quarterback in this draft class, and he is my top-rated quarterback in this draft class. But the NFL being a whole bunch of hand-size queens, as they say, and if they're concerned about that, then it's not out of the realm of possibilities that Kenny Pickett falls to round 2. I don't think it's likely to happen, but certainly, if teams look at it and say, look, we've only had, Michael Vick was the last time a guy with hands that small went in the 1st round. And there's just not a rich history of guys with hands that small, succeeding in the NFL. Then I could see NFL teams passing on Kenny Pickett. And again, given the nature of this draft class where you're just not in love with any of these quarterbacks, then I could see a way where Kenny Pickett falls into round 2. But more than likely, my guess is if Carolina doesn't take him, then either New Orleans or Pittsburgh will take him somewhere in the middle of the 1st round. So I doubt, I would bet against him falling in round 2, but certainly out of the realm of possibilities. But we'll talk a little bit more about why I think Kenny Pickett is the best quarterback in this draft. We'll talk about his strengths. We'll talk about his weaknesses as we continue today's Locked On Falcons podcast. But before we get there, guys, of course, I'm going to plug the Locked On Bulldogs podcast. Why not get Clint and Daniel's thoughts on not only the Georgia players in this upcoming draft, but all the things as Georgia Bulldogs look to repeat in their national championship game next year and see what's geared up for that. And of course, you can check out Locked On Bulldogs on a variety of podcast platforms, including all the same ones that you find Locked On Falcons, including on YouTube. So, guys, I want to tell you about Built Bar, the protein bar that tastes just like a candy bar, but it's even better than a candy bar because Built Bar not only tastes good, but it's good for you. They're low in sugar, calories, and carbs, high in protein and fiber. Built Bars are all about Puffs flavors this month. Puffs are the first ever protein-infused marshmallow. They're fluffy, marshmallowy goodness. Puffs have fan favorite incredible flavors like churro puff, banana cream pie, coconut marshmallow, ruby chocolate, lemon dip cheesecake. And speaking of cheesecake, there also is a limited time flavor raspberry cheesecake on sale right now. And you can head on over to built.com, get one of those puffs, get raspberry cheesecake, or get your tried and trues like salted caramel and coconut almond, peanut butter brownie, and so much more by going to built.com. And when you do, use the promo code LOCKED15 and you'll get 15% off your order. That's promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com. So as I said, Kenny Pickett is QB1. For me, he's my highest graded quarterback. I'm not going to sit here and pound the table for Kenny Pickett, nor do I think anybody should pound the table for any quarterback in this draft class. While I don't think this quarterback it's a trash quarterback class, as some people will tell you, as you know, part of their arguments against the Falcons taking a quarterback, period. But certainly there's nobody in this draft class that to me is worthy of a top 15 pick. And we've discussed this previously, where if you looked at Mac Jones in last year's quarterback class, and Mac Jones went 15th, and then you went to Kyle Trask, who was the next quarterback off the board at 63, I believe. I think you could probably put 5 or so quarterbacks from this year's class somewhere and rate them somewhere between Mac Jones and Kyle Trask, but none of them are above that in that regard. I think the reason why Pickett is QB1 for me is he's just the cleanest evaluation. You can argue he has the highest floor. He ran a pro-style offense, executed it extremely well at Pittsburgh, and you saw the experience really pay off for him, after 3 years as a starter, and now going in this past year being his 4th year as a starter, really sort of checked all the boxes that you wanted to see that we've seen from some other quarterbacks that really sort of came on strong in their final years, like Joe Burrow being the most prominent example. You'll hear comparisons to Joe Burrow just because of the strong finish that Kenny Pickett had. The fact that Joe Burrow's hand size was just like barely crossed the 9-inch threshold. So, that's part of the comparison. I don't think Kenny Pickett's as good as Joe Burrow. The two traits that really stood out to me about Joe Burrow was his pocket mobility and his deep ball accuracy. Those are 2 areas that aren't really great for Kenny Pickett. So I don't think he's Joe Burrow, or even you could say he's a poor man's Joe Burrow. Basically, he has, many of the same strengths or many of the same traits that Joe Burrow has, but doesn't have the sort of standout traits in that regard. Kenny Pickett does check the boxes that if you're looking for that Bill Parcells quarterback commandments type of quarterback, and those were something that Bill Parcells came up with, I think in the 80s or something like that. And so they don't necessarily have as much meaning on today's NFL, or at least college sports, when it comes to the spread offense. But typically that was a 3-year starter, that's a senior, someone who graduated, someone who started at least 30 games in college, won 23 or more games in college, had a 2-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio in college, and completed over 60% of his passes. And you could certainly understand that, like in 1989, anybody who was able to accomplish that at the collegiate level was probably a high-level quarterback. Today, some of those numbers are pretty easy to do given the proliferation of the spread and whatnot. But Pickett was a 4-year starter. He was a senior. He graduated. He started 49 career games, won 33 games, had a touchdown interception ratio of 2.5 to 1, and it had 62 career completion rate. Now, notably about this whole Bill Parcells quarterback commandments, this is why the Dolphins didn't take Matt Ryan #1 overall back in that 2008, because Matt Ryan didn't quite clear that 2-to-1 touchdown interception ratio. Plus, Matt Ryan didn't have necessarily a great arm. And so the Dolphins wound up passing on Matt Ryan at the top of round 1, taking Jake Long, and then taking Chad Henne at the top of round 2, who did check all those boxes and certainly had a much stronger arm. I would say Pickett's arm strength is more closer to Matt Ryan than it is to Chad Henne. He can make all the throws, but you're not going to ever be wowed by his arm talent or anything like that. I think the other knock on Kenny Pickett goes back to the Joe Burrow comparison, where I think the main issue with Kenny Pickett is sometimes he struggles to handle pressure. And I thought Matt Waldman and Mark Schofield broke it down pretty well on one of Matt Waldman's, quarterback film school breakdowns that he has on his YouTube channel. And basically he was discussing how when Kenny Pickett knows where the pressure is coming from, he does a really good job handling it. But when sort of that pressure is improvised or whatever, he doesn't see it coming, then he can get into a little bit of trouble when he's forced to improvise. And you can sort of see times where, he gets a little bit of happy feet in the pocket, his eye level dips to deal with that pressure. But he certainly has the athleticism to escape the pocket and make plays with his legs. Again, he's not on the level of, say, a Malik Willis or even a Desmond Ridder in terms of like speed and whatnot. But, he ran a sub 4.7 40. So that puts him, able to, outrun at least maybe not the Deion Joneses of the world, but certainly your low end linebackers, and he can get to beat those guys to the corner and whatnot. So, I feel like with Kenny Pickett, putting him in Atlanta, given the concerns that we have with the offensive line because of those issues, maybe some of that pocket stuff, that could be a question mark for him. But then again, I kind of think there's a question mark for a lot of the quarterbacks in this draft class. So it's hard for me to sort of single out Kenny Pickett and say, oh, like he'd especially have a problem with that. In terms of, because I think the thing that Kenny Pickett has over some of these other guys is that he's really smart and could, handle protections probably a lot better coming into the NFL and recognizing some of those things and those blitzes and those pressure concepts better than a lot of the other counterparts in this quarterback class. And so therefore, even though he may not necessarily handle that pressure when it comes, he's going to have the, that neck up ability to really process that information and anticipate that better than other guys in this regard. My comparison for Kenny Pickett is Derek Carr, and more referring to the younger Derek Carr than necessarily the current Derek Carr, who I think most people would agree is probably like one of the 12 best quarterbacks in the league right now. But I could see Kenny Pickett if he went to a stable situation where he could get like Derek Carr. Derek Carr's been in Oakland or / Las Vegas for 8 years now. This is his 9th season, I think, there, right? 8th season, 2014. Can't do math. 8th season. And so like if you were to give Kenny Pickett, 5+ years to develop in one place and in similar style offense, I could see him, sort of peaking at where about Derek Carr is right now. Again, not a guy that you're going to sit here and be like, oh, that guy's going to go out there and win us a Super Bowl, but certainly a guy I think can get you to the postseason most years. And if you put the right supporting cast around him, who knows? The right combination could happen where you could make a deep postseason run. But again, you're not going to, he's not going to be Patrick Mahomes. He's not going to be Josh Allen. He's going to put a team on the back, and, you're not going to expect him to, get into a game throwing the ball 40, 50 times a game and throwing for like 400 yards or something ridiculous like we saw in some of these playoff games these last couple of years with some of those elite quarterbacks. That's never going to be Kenny Pickett, but I certainly think he can be a very solid starter in the league. And I certainly think compared to some of these other guys, while his ceiling may not be super, super high, I think his floor is probably above several of the other guys. And I don't think his ceiling is that far below some of these guys as people would make you. Again, he may not be the athlete that some of these guys are, but I think some of that, when we get into the conversation about how important is athleticism and mobility and all this, it matters. Don't get me wrong, but like, it's not probably as big a thing that, separates quarterbacks into different tiers as much as people make it out. Like you're all in the same tier and you can maybe differentiate yourself within that tier, but it's not like, oh, well, Malik Willis is a better athlete than, Kenny Pickett, or Desmond Ridder is a better athlete than Kenny Pickett. And so if Kenny Pickett tops out as the 12th best quarterback in the league, that means, Malik Willis can be the 7th best quarterback. Like, no, it's like, that's not really how it works. So, I think when people talk about the ceiling and whatnot, they can kind of overrate that stuff to a certain extent, at least in my opinion, but we'll save that for when we get into the other conversations about the other quarterbacks as we, get through this draft process. And we'll wrap up our Kenny Pickett conversation there and get into the conversation around the day 2 selections that Chad Reuter had in his mock draft. And we'll get into that as we continue today's mock draft Monday. But before we get there, guys, I do want to plug the Locked On NFL podcast. I know free agency is slowing down, but it doesn't mean that a lot of stuff hasn't happened that still needs to be talked about as it applies to all 32 NFL teams. And of course, you can check out Locked On NFL on a variety of podcast platforms, including all the ones that you listen to Locked On Falcons, as well as watch Locked On Falcons, including Apple, Odyssey, Google, Spotify, and of course on YouTube. And guys, I want to tell you about a new product that I've been trying for the last several weeks. It's called Athletic Greens. It's a product I take every day. It's like taking a multivitamin without having to take a million little different pills. It's just one scoop of their AG1 product with a cup of water first thing in the morning, and it starts my day off right. And it's much better way to start my day than drinking the 2 to 3 cups of coffee that I normally load up with sugar and creamer each and every morning. And AG1, instead of, adding all this sugar first thing in the morning, I'm getting 75 high quality vitamins, minerals, superfoods, probiotics, adaptogens, and a special blend of ingredients that's not only improving my gut health, it's a boost to my nervous and immune systems. It boosts my energy, it boosts my recovery, it boosts my focus throughout the day. And you too can reclaim your health and boost your immune system with convenient daily nutrition with AG1. And Athletic Greens is making it easy because they're going to give you a free year-long supply of immune-supporting vitamin D and 5 free travel packs of AG1 with your first purchase. All you have to do is visit athleticgreens.com/NFL network. Again, that's athleticgreens.com/NFL network to take ownership of your health and pick up the ultimate daily nutritional insurance. So as I said at the top of the episode, there were 3 day 2 selections in Chad Reuter's 4-round mock draft. The first of those selections was Travis Jones. Again, the Falcons traded out of pick 43 to go up and get the incomparable Kenny Pickett in this draft, and they wound up getting Travis Jones, the UConn nose tackle, at pick 58. And certainly, for the several months where I was on an anti-Jordan Davis bandwagon, I sat there and said, why would you reach on Jordan Davis when you can just get Travis Jones in round 2, because they're both really premium athletes. Travis Jones, similarly, if Jordan Davis hadn't done the thing that he did at the combine, we would all be talking about how an incredible combine that Travis Jones had. At 325 pounds, he ran a sub 5.040 pound, which is rare. Most of the guys that run, most of the D tackles at least, that run sub 5.040s are usually around 310, 305 in that sort of range. And so, Chad Reuter has Travis Jones falling to the Falcons at pick 58. I could see Travis Jones going into round 1. It seems like Tennessee, Kansas City picking late in round 1 could certainly take him if they feel that need to sort of get that beefy nose tackle that isn't a adept pass rusher, but certainly because of that explosiveness, you could see him being an effective 3-down player, even if he's never going to be this sort of dominant pass rusher. And it's a similar conversation that we're having about Jordan Davis, although, Travis Jones, while explosive, is not to the, off the charts level of explosiveness that Jordan Davis is. And make it clear, if you haven't been listening to the podcast the last couple of weeks, I'm off the anti-Jordan Davis, slander bandwagon. I'm fully on, support Jordan Davis bandwagon. And so therefore I have to also support Travis Jones, just maybe not to the same degree. So to me, like, seeing Travis Jones fall to 58 seems surprising to me, given that I think he's probably going to go somewhere between like pick 25 and pick 40 and probably be off the board by the time the Falcons pick up 43. So if I'm sort of projecting a D tackle that could come in and play some nose tackle sort of snaps for the Falcons that could be on the board at pick 58, I would much more expect to see Alabama's Fiderian Mathis as a guy that could go in that range. But Chad Reuter has fiderian Mathis going in round 4 at pick 114 to Houston, which is not the pick that the Falcons traded to Houston in this mock draft. But just interesting in that regard, I think. Let's move on to the round 3 selection. Nik Bonitto, I think that's another good fit for the Falcons. Very explosive, but kind of undersized edge rusher. He did bulk up to like 249 at the combine, and I think he was probably closer to 230 when he played, or where he was listed at. He's a guy that fits the DMP style of defense. He can play on all 3 downs. He can set their edge against the run. He can certainly rush the quarterback, and he's also athletic enough to play in space and to drop into coverage. He's very comparable to a player that the Ravens, when Dean Pease was in his final year as defensive coordinator there, selected in round 2 of that year. That was Tyus Bowser. And Bowser sort of, became a rotational player, and only in the last couple of years sort of emerging as more of a full-time pass rusher. I feel like Bonito is probably a better prospect than Bowser. So while you don't have, I think Bowser had like 8 sacks this past year in like his first year, where he had more than 5 sacks in a season. And so I feel like, it took 5 years for Bowser to get there. I could see Bonito doing that in 3, right? So that's why I kind of like him a little bit more. So you can argue that getting Bonito at 74 rather than taking him in round 2 is somewhat of a steal, but that's also a testament to how deep this edge class is. I know there's probably going to be, if the Falcons were to draft Nik Bonitto, there will certainly be, a vocal subset of folks that will compare him to Vic Beasley due to the size issues. Although I will be quick to add that, even if he was Vic Beasley, and I don't think that's a fair comparison, but there are some similarities to their games. But even if he was Vic Beasley, you know what? my hot, spicy take is that if that's not a bad thing, because if Vic Beasley was playing in Dean Pease's defense, Vic Beasley would have been used correctly, which was not the case in Atlanta. Like, the Falcons didn't really figure out how to incorporate Vic Beasley correctly into their defense until Raheem Morris took over the defensive play calling midway through 2019. And again, that's not necessarily a guy that's going to be a super productive 10-sack guy. Again, because that was the expectations that people had on Vic Beasley, and he was never going to be that guy outside of that one sort of fluke season. And Bonito's not going to be that guy, but he's certainly a guy that can give you 5 to 8 sacks a year, 40 plus pressures, or whatever the case may be. And like we saw with Vic Beasley in the second half of 2019, even though that individual production wasn't great, is an integral part of the Falcons defense, with sort of his ability to drop into coverage when the team would, scheme up blitzes and creepers and all these various things on defense. And Vic Beasley's athleticism was a plus ability so that he could cover those linebackers and those tight ends over the middle and in the flat, and sort of be that QB spy and whatnot. Nik Bonitto could be that type of player, but the good thing about taking him in round 3 is no one's going to be expecting him to be the next John Abraham. So that would be a good thing for Nik Bonitto, and wouldn't necessarily have these monster expectations that he'll never live up to if he was the Falcons selection here at the beginning of round 3. And of course, as I mentioned at the top of the show, let's move on to the second of the third round picks, the pick that, we had to do right by our guy and get Charlie Kolar, the Iowa State tight end. And I haven't watched a ton of him. I've seen enough of him to give you an overall assessment. He's big. He's almost 6'7", 250 plus pounds, long arms, very good wingspan, not quite Kyle Pitts levels, but only a few inches shorter than that. So you like the catch radius and the potential. He tested very well as pro day. He was injured, I think, for the combine or whatever the case may be. Ran a sub 4.7 40, had jumps in the above 75th percentile according to mockdraftable.com. His 6'9", 8'3" cone. It was also, in that sort of 80th percentile range, similar to what Austin Hooper had. And from a testing standpoint, his explosiveness, his speed was a little bit better than Austin Hooper's, but similarly an above average to good athlete that Austin Hooper tested at when he went to his pro day. And similar to Austin Hooper, is not going to be a guy that's going to win with athleticism and be this matchup nightmare that, like safeties can't cover him, linebackers can't cover him, or whatever the case may be. He's not a guy that's going to run past guys despite his testing, or really get easy separation from guys like you would expect from, a Kyle Pitts caliber athlete. But Kolar has that size that, and that catch radius that he can win in traffic, and he's very comfortable in traffic and sort of winning and boxing and being that low post tight end, or whatever the case may be. And similar to Hooper, if you have a quarterback that can build a rapport with him and trust him, he can be a very effective player, even if he isn't, again, similar to Hooper, not going to be like, this is one of the best tight ends in the league. This is a high quality, solid starter for you that can be a reliable option for your quarterback. We know that the Falcons are interested in him because they sent Justin Peele, the Falcons tight end coach, to that Iowa State pro day last week. So they're seemingly interested in both of the Iowa State tight ends, with Chase Allen being his counterpart there. From what little tape I watched, I feel like Chase Allen's probably the better blocker than Charlie Kolar, but I think Kolar has the size and potential. There's growth potential there for him as a blocker. I know many of you are like, we don't need another tight end or whatever it gets me. We need wide receivers. And it's like, yeah, it's true. Based off of this mock draft, trading out of 43 is, going to eliminate the Falcons' ability to get one of these high-end wide receivers early in the draft, one of the top 8 or so wide receivers that many people are expecting to go in the top 50 or so picks of this draft. But taking a tight end is not crazy, because if you assume that Kyle Pitts is going to continue to be split out wide for 70+% of his snaps, if Cordero Patterson, given the Falcons' potential running back depth, now that they added Damian Williams, they kept Mike Davis, and say in round 5 they can still get a really good running back. Obviously in round 4 you would hope that, but again, in this scenario, we're trading out of round 4 to get Kenny Pickett. And I think the depth of this running back class is good enough that there will still be some very good running backs in round 5. You can make the case that adding a tight end, adding a reliable red zone threat like Kolar has the potential to be, given his size and catch radius and whatnot. And then you just have Patterson playing a lot more wide receiver. We talked about this before, where last year 60% of his snaps came in the backfield, 40% came split out wide. What if you made 40% of his snaps in the backfield, 60% out wide is the case, and then hopefully still be able to supplement your wide receiver core or whatever the case may be. So I think the idea of the Falcons using a premium pick, in those first 4 or 5 rounds on a tight end is actually probably going to happen. Given the usage of the 2 tight end offense. We know that we didn't maximize that last year with Hayden Hurst and Lee Smith, but certainly at least the potential is still there that could be a very valuable asset for this Falcons offense. And how Arthur Smith wants to run it. You just got to do a better job, incorporating that second tight end into the offense. And I think Charlie Kolar, while obviously is not going to probably as a rookie tight end be this instant impact guy, in terms of building towards the long-term future of this offense, you want to have that sort of 1-2 punch, potentially with him and Kyle Pitts there that can get, basically be the 2 twin towers, a 6'6" guy and a 6'7" guy at the tight end position to give the team a lot of size at that position. And that's intriguing for the future, even if it may not necessarily immediately pay off in 2022. So those are my thoughts on Chad Reuter's 4-round mock draft. Again, don't see the Falcons trading up for a quarterback. Certainly a possibility that they could take a quarterback at the top of this draft, but I think what's more likely is that they'll wait and see who's there in round 2 rather than reaching on a guy, in round 1. But we'll just sort of have to see how it all plays out, guys. And that's going to do it for us here on today's episode of Locked On Falcons. As this week unfolds, we'll get you more coverage on some of the free agents that the Falcons picked up. We'll start pivoting towards the draft, hopefully talking a little bit more about these quarterbacks, as that will be, again, a pressing topic of concern for the next several weeks. But if you want to provide your feedback to me on anything I've discussed on today's episode, you can do so via Twitter or Facebook at Locked On Falcons, via email at lockedonfalcons@mail.com. You can also leave a comment here on the Locked On Falcons YouTube channel. And again, I want to thank you guys for making Locked On Falcons your first listen each and every day. And of course, Locked On Falcons is free and available Monday through Friday on a variety of podcast platforms, including Apple, Odyssey, Google, Spotify, and of course on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to that Locked On Falcons YouTube channel. And while we duck out of here, I want to plug another show in addition to Locked On Bulldogs, Locked On Braves, Locked On Hawks, Locked On NFL. Why not check out the Locked On NFL Draft podcast that is going to keep you guys covered all week long, all day long, on all those same podcast platforms, on all things NFL draft related, including today, which is a mock draft Monday. Get Ryan Tracy's and Eric Crocker's breakdown of what the first round should be on today's Locked On NFL Draft podcast. So guys, that's going to do it for us here. Appreciate it. Till then.